Welcome to A Connected Higher Education Landscape. My name is Jeremy Bauer-Wolf. I am a senior reporter at Higher Ed Dive. We are a business publication here in DC, and this is absolutely my plug to subscribe to our daily newsletter if you have not. We're here to discuss some of the topics I write about every day. I'm very excited to do it, and with some of the people who are the top education leaders in their state. So we're really excited to hear their perspectives about what their short and long-term needs of their colleges and universities are. We have Dr. Sarah Armstrong Tucker, Chancellor of West Virginia Higher Education, Dr. Kim Hunter-Reid, Commissioner of Louisiana Higher Education, and Dr. Aaron Thompson, President of the Kentucky Council on Postsecondary Education. Welcome. Thank you all for being here with us.
Thank you.
So I'd like to start out with a hard question, but it's top of mind for every college leader. We know that the pandemic exacerbated existing barriers for low-income and minority students, and it's challenging for these people already to reach a post-secondary education. So I'd love to hear from you all. What sort of student was most impacted by the health crisis, and how did you work to reconnect them to a post-secondary education? Dr. Tucker, did you want to start?
Sure. So I appreciate the word exacerbated because the truth is that those barriers existed for all of our students. The pandemic made it worse, but they didn't create the problem. And so in West Virginia, although we just talked about the digital divide maybe being a little bit less, more than 40% of our residents don't have access to broadband. So in March, we sent everybody home with the belief that they could learn online. And I don't care what our teachers or our professors did to make that work be accessible online. With more than 40% of our people not having access to broadband, they didn't have access to education. And so we figured out pretty quickly that we had to do something about that. We had an imperfect solution, to say the least. We did something called Kids Connect. We put 1,000 points of internet that we just broadcast into parking lots, churches, K-12 schools, higher ed schools, any place that would let us broadcast. It was not a great solution. It was the solution that we had at the time that we had to do the best that we could with what we did. And the governor supported us on that. The governor backed it, used some of the GEAR funds to do it. But that divide in the state of West Virginia is for our low-income students, it's for our rural students, it's for our students of color, and how do we make sure that our students have access in this changing world? If we're going to change to a hybrid workforce or a hybrid education system, which it looks like we might, how do we do that if 40% of our people don't have access to broadband? And so the governor's been very concentrated recently on trying to make sure that that opportunity gets expanded across the state.
I'd say ditto on the broadband challenges. I would say for us in Louisiana, where 1 in 5 people are in poverty, those who have the least were impacted the most. So we saw a continued decrease in college going for our traditional high school students. We saw African American students displaced, particularly African American males. Certainly adults, our double-digit decline in community college enrollment as we saw across the country. And so significant challenges in trying to keep education moving. To your question of who was impacted, so many people were impacted. What did we do? We tried to make sure that we had an opportunity to use stimulus dollars to try to keep students in school and try to retain them as best we could. So we put dollars into Reboot Louisiana, short-term high-demand credentials tied to immediate workforce needs for people who are displaced. We tried to make sure we used stimulus dollars for completers, for students who were near completion, so they could just get across that finish line. Even though I will say stimulus dollars certainly helped keep our institutions afloat and certainly keep our students moving forward. But there were specific interventions that were necessary for people just to try to keep moving forward, because as you've heard from all these panels, when people stop out, often they don't come back. And so that was the critical focus for us.
Yeah, ditto, obviously, but there's a couple of points I want to make. It's not just about access, it's about capacity. I mean, even though they may have had access, they didn't have the capacity because mom or dad or someone in the house, they were working from home also. Right. And so those that are the most affected were those historically the most disenfranchised. And I keep on going forever with this conversation, but you also have to put it in perspective. You not only had to do stuff online, quote unquote, you had to be somewhat digital literate to do that, and that's including the faculty doing it, because we all swooped to go online and we thought about that within the context of how we reach students with what we currently do and how we do it. You have to also understand that the disenfranchised, many of those weren't getting engaged face-to-face, or they were not being engaged. Think about now online in engagement. So other than just that, we had to focus on what I call the outcome measures, the student success pieces, how we help back, so we took our money and we helped faculty to get up to an engagement process, not just delivering the academics. Obviously, we gave those that didn't have access, and so on. But the other piece, and I think is important, we knew we had a mental health issue before the pandemic. This exacerbated that, not only among students, but among teachers and among other adults. And so we put a little money in that before the pandemic, and when we got money from the GEAR funding and so on, we actually doubled down on that. We also brought colleges and K-12 together to say, tell us who you're not reaching and how can we reach, especially in our community colleges that covers the state, how can we reach them? How can we do what we need to do professional development-wise? And we did this in our office to help faculty know how to do that. There's a lot more to this, but quickly, those are some of the added items that I think we had to look at.
I appreciate the conversation about digital literacy, especially when it comes to faculty and broadband access. And I personally, I heard stories from faculty who may have not even turned on their own computer, right? So what changes that you described, that happened during the pandemic, that digital literacy, that broadband access, reaching those students who have mental health needs, what sort of changes do you think will stick around? Which ones do you want to stick around?
So we made a pretty significant dent in the professional development for faculty and going online. We all know that when the pandemic hit, we just threw the syllabus up, right? I mean, that's what happened. No one had time to design a class and make the class be what it was. You just took your syllabus and you put it online and you did the best that you could. But during that summer, we spent a very significant amount of time, just like Aaron said, making sure that our faculty had that development. That's continued throughout, providing that faculty development and really getting faculty engaged in that work. So we've launched an OER initiative that we had been talking about but hadn't launched to try to get our students, which is another barrier to college completion, obviously, so that our students had access to free online resources. We've spent a lot of time around behavioral health initiatives and trying to create a community of behavioral health specialists in the state. I don't see any of that going away anytime soon. I think those are things that have become sort of part of what we do and are good things that we need to continue to do.
I would say yes, and one of the conversation of this entire summit is about connectivity, and so one of the things I think we did well that we need to retain is reaching out to students. As soon as the pandemic hit, we had campuses that stood up phone banks. We went old school, right? Called students and said, how are you doing and what can we do to help? So we had alumni, faculty, staff doing that for students. And I think asking those important questions is really, critical for students just to support them. The other piece I think you've heard today was around flexibility. Flexibility around how you want to learn, when you want to learn. Do you want to come on campus to meet with a financial aid advisor or academic advisor? Would you rather do that online? So that flexibility, I think, is critically important as well. So I think those are the kinds of things that are important for students. Student support services, we need more of it. And students respond when we do well. They respond when they know someone is rooting for them and they know who to connect with when they need some support, and to know that it's okay to do that there's an expectation. I think that's another piece that's important, is to set the expectation for students that college is going to be challenging, but we are here to help. So please reach out, see the tutor, get the information that you need. Those are the kinds of things that I think allow students to really thrive and to be successful.
And I could ditto that and talk about much more of that, but I'm going a little bit different direction. One of the things that I did when I took over this position was to get an advisory group of faculty from all around the institutions. It didn't matter if it was a community and technical college or a four-year institution, research or not. I got a group of folk that could really inform me from where the rubber meets the road. I also did that with students, adult learners, and a variety of others. So we started asking them questions early about what are we not doing, what can we do? And as I met with the presidents, every week we talked about innovation on the spot. We knew we were going to have to react to stuff, right? We knew that. But how can we create innovation? How can we locate some of these things now that we're going to have to start putting in place that we know we're going to have forever? We're always going to have far more digital literacy, far more of the professional development. We're going to have to look at mental health now in a variety of ways. We quadruple counselors on our campuses, true enough, but our web-based services became more robust. Our telehealth services became, all of that's going to stay in place. The thing I hope stays in place more than anything else is what we put in place, hopefully we'll talk about in a little bit, is our way to think about this in a very P to the workplace scenario. We have to talk about this from the beginning where we're losing it. People talk about loss of learning. Well, it's not just the academic piece that was loss of learning. Those that have to have an idea that college is worth it, we lost a lot of that because we didn't reach them. So we sent snail mail to people in addition to all the other things because we knew that we were going to have to hit it from all sides. Once again, a lot of these items have to stay in place because when we talk about innovation, it's not innovation somehow we look at the data once it's over. We think about innovation in a very real-time way. How do we continuously do this and build on it?
So everything that you mentioned, innovation, needing more, takes money. So local and state appropriations actually for colleges was up nationwide in fiscal 2021, and that's partially because the federal government gave out aid money, coronavirus aid money. But we know, of course, that is not quite the accurate picture for all states, right? It's a little bit more nuanced. In some states they're struggling to reach funding levels even like prior to the Great Recession. So I wonder if you could talk about, navigating some of those budget trends in your states, what the picture looks like, and now that the federal stimulus has sort of run dry, what do you expect to go from there?
So I'll say for us, we were very pleased to have 2 years of reinvestment in higher education in our state. We worry about budget trends a lot because higher education and healthcare are the two areas that are not protected constitutionally in the budget. So we are very concerned about what is happening overall. But I'm proud of the governor and grateful to the governor and legislators, the faculty members, stakeholders who were able to make the case that our educational attainment agenda is a recovery agenda, and a stronger and more prosperous Louisiana means an educated Louisiana, a well-trained Louisiana. And so that case making, I think, really paid off for us in terms of the last 2 years of reinvestment. We're looking to see, obviously, long-term trends in our budget and trying to make sure we understand that. The stimulus dollars, as I mentioned, made a real difference for our students and for our institutions, but we are subject to the market. So we've got to make sure that we are responsive to the market when it comes to supporting students and families, as Aaron mentioned, who may not see the value anymore. They understand the cost, but do they understand the value? And is the value real for them? I think those are important conversations for us to have. But to the legislators, to the governor, to other stakeholders, we have been able in the last few years to make the case. Now, we were a state that had one of the largest disinvestments in higher education in the nation, so we have much more work to do, but we're trending positive, and we appreciate the support.
For me, we had been cut 12 straight years. We were at the bottom of disinvestment in so many ways. But I'm going to answer your question. I'm going to give you a little preamble first. So,
Okay, my seatbelt button.
that's right. So the argument needed to be, why did we need the investment? It could have been easily said, we need it because you took it from us. That argument quit working a long time ago.
That's right.
So not once when I testified the 14 times I did during the interim and during the time did I talk about you guys didn't invest in us before, invest in us now because we think we're worth it. I talked about the return on investment. I talked about how, yes, you have to fund, I listen to people talk about balanced budgets, you have to fund all those things you have to fund. We know that. But please understand, those things you're funding are largely resulting from not having a good education. So this is an investment. So I argue the investment argument, and we got more money than we've ever gotten, which I'm happy, and I appreciate our legislature and the governor's office for doing that. But to answer your question, we have to show that funding is one thing. what are the outcomes of that funding? We have an outcomes model I'm happy to talk about, but that outcomes model has to focus on the most disenfranchised populations more than it does. We have to redevelop their ways of thinking. We control tuition. How do we redevelop the way we are thinking around helping students that may not have enough money? How do we let students know how much they should borrow? All those. So the funding is one thing. What's associated with that funding to get the most out of it is another question. And I think that probably should always be the question those of us who are higher ed leaders try to answer.
And so to take that point, Aaron's point, a little bit further, I have lots of initiatives that I don't ask money for, right? And so we knew that we had a significant mental health crisis on our campuses, as everyone did, all across the nation. So we invested in the Green Bandana Initiative. So we have our students acting as peer supports. Cost my agency a couple $1,000s, bought some green bandanas, trained the kids, and it's been a terrific initiative. It's gone all across our state. But also we have, to Aaron's point, there's money in state budgets, there's money in federal budgets that come to states that we don't often examine to look and see how is that money being spent and is it being spent in the best possible way. And perhaps there are ways that we can do different things with that money. So for example, at each of our community colleges in West Virginia, we have at least one, sometimes multiple, TANF coordinators who are embedded in our college. And we did that because we have so many single women that are in our colleges and they need help. And they need help navigating the resources, figuring out where they're going to find all of the benefits that they have access to. And then we have single moms who don't know anything about TANF or SNAP, who exist in our colleges, who stop out because they don't have childcare, they don't, whatever the thing is. And so by working with these state agencies that have this funding, we don't actually have to increase our state budget. We can just move and use the money more effectively and efficiently than we were before. And I think that's a really hard conversation to have at a state level. It's a really hard conversation to have across agencies because you're messing with people's money. But I think it's a conversation that needs to happen, and it's one that the governor has really championed in West Virginia, and we're trying to move forward.
I do want to come back to the return on investment conversation because I think it's key and very important. But I did want to ask, because we've seen in many states bills popping up that traditionally are left to colleges, some of these operations, tenure decisions, curricula choices. And so when you're working with these lawmakers, how do you maintain higher ed's autonomy while also, getting back and forth with these folks who control the purse strings? And I'm not trying to get you in trouble, but...
You know me. So I think that's a great question because I do believe that curriculum should be left up to the faculty. And I also believe that faculty need to work with understanding where students need to be 10 years from now to develop the curriculum that's needed for them. But the thing I will tell you is that part of the curriculum conversation should be had by others. We should be informing our faculty and our legislators and others about where students need to be 10 years from now. If you take out culturally competent curriculum, think about what we're doing to our nation. Right. I mean, think about that for a second. But we also have to argue we need those liberal arts skills to be intertwined because they're employability skills. Whether they get a technical certificate or a 4-year degree, how then we talk about that? So a part of our job is to talk about what students need. That's where employers come in to talk with us along those lines. I will say this more directly to your question. I think our job is to actually be able to communicate in a variety of ways, but not talk out of both sides of our mouths. So what I mean by that is the argument that I pose to the legislators, you want us to give a return on investment for the outcomes you want in the workplace, we're going to have to get a lot more people of color, a lot more low-income people into the pipeline, or you're going to be spending more money as you are in these other areas. That's why you hire me. That's right. I mean, because a part of what we have to take on our backs is the reality that we are in an interesting political environment. So how we manage that, I think, has to be a dialogue process. I talk about equity openly. I know some people can't. I do, because those are the inputs that we're going to have. We're going to have far more Black and Latinx faculty. We're going to have far more people knowing how to do culturally competent education, how to do learning instead of teaching. I mean, all of those, what I call, is the future of Kentucky for us and the future of America. So that's the conversation I have. It's not about whether or not you should impose certain sorts of legislation. It is saying that if you pose this legislation, this is the outcome you're going to get. That's a return on investment.
And I think that those conversations are easier because this is a relationship building, right? This is trust building. And so when you're in conversations, when you're in the districts of your legislators, when they're hearing from their local faculty and campus leaders to say, here's what we're trying to do, but we're here to listen. Tell us what you think about where we are. And then when we have policy disagreements, we built that trust. We have those relationships. And we are able to say, as Aaron said, here's the negative impact. Let's think about whether or not that's good for our campuses, for our state, and for our students. And so those conversations are easier to have. But there's no doubt that there are some significant political divide and significant challenges. But at the end of the day, for all of us, our success rests in the ability to advocate effectively for our students and for education and talent development. And that success means that you're an honest broker, you're building trust, and you're listening and working hard every day on behalf of talent development and your students.
Ditto. I mean, in exactly what both of you were saying, and you have to be present, right? I mean, they have to know who you are, because if they don't know who you are, then there's no reason to trust. And there typically has to be some conversation at some point. If you see something and you're like, I'm just not really sure what this is getting at, the question becomes, what problem are you trying to solve for? Now let me help you figure out how to actually solve for that problem and what that looks like and how we can do this to get this over the goal. But yes, to everything that they said.
So the return on investment, and I think this is key because there's almost a hyper focus on it right now. Lawmakers, like you said, they want to see that colleges are performing. Students and families who are shelling out this money, they want to see, that colleges are fulfilling their end of the bargain. But, is there too much focus on it? Is it a healthy discourse on return on investment? Is this the best way to measure your institutions? How does that look for you all?
Depends on how you operationally define it.
Yep.
The way we historically have, I think it's really the wrong focus. If you look at return on investment as far as dollars, we can do that. We took classes of all of our high school students that graduated from high school. We followed each one of them and looked at where they were 5, 6, 7 years later, whatever, and what happened to them along the way, how much money they were making, jobs they had. And we looked at the amount of money the state put into their education and aid, as well as direct appropriations to the campuses, and the state's getting a 62% return on investment. That's not a bad deal. But we can't look at it just like that. How do we look at it from the standpoint of return on investment when we think about we have affected generational poverty? My father was an illiterate coal miner. I'm the head of higher education. Yeah. But if we don't look at what we need to do all the way from pre-K all the way through college, then we're failing to think about return on investment at the most micro level. So it has to be a variety of ways you do it. The people that get an education, whether, by the way, college is anything beyond high school in my state, so those that try to make it just a 4-year degree are wrong. But those that are just trying to purely focus on the technical outcomes are wrong too. It's not a one-size-fits-all. It's the way that the student needs to go. But my argument is that if you look at return on investment to student outcomes as well as the quality of education, it's not purely the quantity. If a student believes that his or her degree or credential help create an outcome that they need for themselves and their families, that's a hell of a return on investment. So we have to really look at this far more holistic, but we have to be the ones to talk about that and really show the argument. And I'm happy to do it with data. I'm a data guy, as you know. I'm happy to do it with that, but it has to be also the qualitative outcomes.
So I was just actually talking to Governor Wise about this earlier, and from an ROI perspective, it's one thing. I think we need to be talking about higher ed as an economic development engine, right? So in West Virginia, we recruit companies to come in. We're a population of 1.8 million people. Our college going rate is 48%. The percentage of folks that we have with some post-secondary education and training, 43% for people who are over the age of 25. When companies come to West Virginia and are looking to invest in West Virginia, one of the first questions that they ask is, how deep is your workforce bench? And it's not just a skill set, it's not just community college, it's not just baccalaureate, it's not just master's, it's not just it's all of it. How deep is your bench? And our bench isn't very deep. And so if we want these companies to come and make multiple $1 billion investments in our state, we have to do something about getting the education and training in our state up, or else they're not going to come and invest. I can't tell you the number of times that I have been in conversations with companies where I have to sit down and break down the statistics for them and say, okay, I understand that you need 200 employees, but you need 20 employees who have this skill set, and here's where I can find them. And you need 20 employees who have this, and this is how I can find them. And patchwork that together for them, because just based on our statistics, it doesn't look like they should be making an investment in us necessarily from an education standpoint. Now, from an economic standpoint, that's a totally different story. There's lots of reasons to make that investment. I'm just talking about education. And so we really have to think about how we're thinking about economic development in our state and how higher ed fits into the picture of economic development, because it is an essential piece of that. And a pure ROI, it will never get at that. It will never explain that.
I agree on what we've heard. I do think that when you ask the question about ROI, is it, you asked, is it too much conversation? The fact that we're continuing to talk about it means we're still not hitting it correctly, right? The message is not penetrating. We're not getting there. And so I think Erin is right, and Sarah. We can talk about ROI in terms of, the data is clear. A more educated population is employed, is healthier, is more civically engaged, is more likely to be charitable. People who are educated children are more likely to be educated, and on it goes. So when you think about who are we messaging to, the state, the policymakers who invest in us, yes, we have a message, but what about the families? What about the students who are no longer at our institutions? The K-12 students who are not in school, the higher education students who are not in our institutions, and then how do we make that case to them that higher education is a path to prosperity? Is it a certainty or is it a gamble? What does that conversation look like? As I mentioned, people understand the affordability challenge. They don't understand the value proposition. What does that look like? And so for me, when I hear people continuing to ask the question, is college worth it? What's the ROI? It's a message to us as educators that there is more work to be done. We have to go deeper. There are people who still do not believe that this investment makes sense. And yet you just heard a former Secretary of Education effectively say, if you're a high school and only a high school, it is a pathway to poverty. There are not jobs for you. And so how do we make a case effectively and demonstrate the ROI to families, to students, to states, and to all?
Yeah, let me add one other thing Sarah brought to mind. I don't think I said this clearly in my statement earlier, but there is a direct path to economic development. If you think about, we talk to employers that want to come to your state, we talk to employers in their state. What do they ask for more than anything else? An educated workforce. Right. And they're not just asking for an educated workforce around just the skills. Many of them can teach them that. Yeah. They're asking for students to know how to think, work with other people of different backgrounds, to know how to communicate, and a variety of other things. So if you want a strong economic thriving system, you have to have a strong, highly educated workforce. And you cannot do that without a strong higher ed system. It's impossible. So that's such a high correlation. And as a stats guy, I can tell you, I can show causality. So this idea, we only use that rubric alone. It's worth their state to invest. Now, obviously, as I said earlier, there's a lot of other operational definitions, but that alone is a statement we should be making.
So I think we have time for one more question. I'm very happy that it's the last one because it's sort of something near and dear to my heart. Dr. Tucker, you brought up, the term economic engine, and institutions like public regionals, two-year schools, so often they are the economic engines of their communities. So I'd love to hear from you all, how have you seen students benefit from those institution types? Because, legacy media, myself excluded, we tend to write about like, the Harvards of the world, but that's not higher education.
That's exactly right.
So can you just share a little bit about how you've seen, like you said, those regional publics, not the flagships, the two-year schools really benefit the students, and how can we bolster them?
West Virginia is rural Appalachia, right? People, generations and generations and generations of people have stayed in our state and have stayed with their families because that is something that we value very, very much. And going away, driving far away, even if it's 4 hours, which may seem like nothing to some of you, it's a lot for the people where I live. It's a lot. And so they frankly do better, a lot of folks do better if they're able to be near their home and they have that support structure and that support system. And those regional institutions, those community colleges, they provide that support structure. And it may very well be that the student gets a year under his or her belt or 2 years under his or her belt and says, you know what, I got this, I can do this, I can go on to one of the flagships now. But that's great, then that regional institution or that community college has given them that opportunity to be successful and to move on, or maybe think about graduate school or something else. But without that initial step, what we end up seeing is a lot of students going to flagships and then dropping out within their first semester. And so we've got to better utilize those community colleges and better utilize those regionals to stop that trend from happening. We see it all too often in West Virginia.
I would say our University of Louisiana system, our regional institution, is our largest system. And we think about our equity gaps, our community colleges educate our largest number of African American students. These are institutions that are of and for the community. I think Sarah's right. They are local. They understand the pathways to employment opportunities. Our community colleges are always working very closely with the needs of industry and business. How do we support them? I think we certainly talk about the good work they're doing, tell their stories, invest in them, and certainly talk about them as a great first choice with great outcomes for those that have great outcomes for students. I think that's important as well. I mean, I think all of us love going to commencement, right? That's when you see one student cross the stage and 50 family members cheering them on, right? This is a family success story when you see students graduate, and certainly we see that at the flagships and the community colleges as well. But our community colleges are college. Our regional institutions are doing great research, applied research, and helping. And the entire higher education ecosystem is critical. But you're absolutely right. We need to tell the stories, the success stories of these institutions that are for the community and are doing a great job in supporting students. And we need that work. We need people to see themselves as education success stories, and they see that often because they have a local connection.
I'd love to just talk about students here, and that's where I want to go, but I'm not sure how much time we have, so I'll jump in with saying this, that if you just look at the amount of dollars that all of our institutions are located in the community put in that community, I mean, they're workforce hubs, but period. I mean, that's helping the community, believe it or not. The other thing, too, is that we have to look at all of our institutions, whether a research institution or HBCUs, which I'm a former president of, and I've been in higher ed for 35 years, hard to believe. I don't look it, I know. But the thing that I will tell you is that all of those have their mission, but the main mission of every single one of those institutions will be to help students get through it, to get actively employed, and obviously, hopefully, they'll give back. But yes, there are, if you want to look at it from the standpoint of how, I mean, our community college, technical colleges, they're really open enrollment, and they're lower cost. But we're also then going to have to think about how to make sure that all those courses they take is transferable without doing an evaluation of everything. These are seamless transfer system. We're also going to have to think about how to use dual credit to build a pipeline with a curricular pipeline to where they know they are in college then, and how that's going to help. We have to build wraparound services. So our colleges in those communities are reaching out to these local establishments and helping to build the wraparound services with them. But so are our four-year institutions. Let's get real. There's not going to be a whole lot of campuses out there being able to pull in all this NIH funding, NSF funding, so on. That's a very small group. So we can call ourselves research institution. I'm happy to do that. We got 2 of them in our states with that designation, and everybody want to be, right? But the idea that all of our jobs, even at those institutions, will be able to take our kids and produce an outcome that they can add to the economy. And hopefully we'll keep more in the state, because that's going to help build our economy. I can talk a lot more about that, but that's Yeah.
I was going to say, I don't think we have time, I'm sorry. But actually, I just wanted to thank you all. I think this is an excellent conversation. I think this is something that we're going to continue backstage, I hope. Please join me in thanking everybody. Thank you all.